Good morning. Great to see you today. Happy Palm Sunday. If you're new here, my name's Rob. I'm one of the pastors here, and a special welcome to those of you who are watching online this morning as well. I got to get a different music stand. This one's like way too high. Sorry, it's not moving on me. I'm high maintenance. Now you know. Thank you. Perfect. So we're going through the series in John's Gospel, kind of looking at these encounters that bring about significant change in the lives of people. And today we're going to look at a story about a man who was born blind, blind right from the first day at birth. And so I'll tell you a little story. I had my own little brush with near blindness a few years ago. In early 2020, I developed what my optometrist graciously referred to as young person cataracts. A cataract is a lens that develops over your eye, and it doesn't blind you, but it blurs your sight quite significantly. I used to describe it as, imagine someone took a big dollop of Vaseline and smeared it over your eye. That was kind of my experience of cataracts. I'd gone to my optometrist for a regular appointment early March 2020, and everything was fine. There was no signs of anything. But by early April and May, I was noticing that in my left eye, I couldn't see very well. I'd be trying to read, and so I did what you do. You kind of start blinking your eyes to see, all right, which eye's not working, and it became clear to me it was my left one. Because it was the pandemic, it was hard to get an appointment, so I didn't get in till August, and when I went to my optometrist in August, she said to me, you have a young person's cataract. And she says, you've lost about 80% of your vision in your left eye. And I thought, well, that's okay. I've got my right eye. One eye, who really needs two? But at that point, she said to me, actually, you've got a cataract that started also in your right eye. And by early 2021, I was experiencing a form of near blindness. Everything was blurry and fuzzy and kind of distorted. Now, if a cataract surgery takes about 15 minutes. I mean, it's the kind of thing they could do while they're eating their lunch and playing on their phone. It's a very routine procedure, easily fixed. But because it was the pandemic, I went 19 months kind of with obscured vision. It was great. I learned that your phone has a magnifying glass app on it that you can open it up and you can blow up the menu, or if you're trying to read a book, you can do this. My kids, it gave them great comedic value because all the fonts on my computer screen were enormous and all of my widgets on my phone were enormous, and I was barely getting by. If you notice my car, it's got all kinds of dents and bumpers broken in 2 spots, and I had to replace my side mirror because, you really really drive if you can't see. That might be the great takeaway for some of you here this morning. All this to say, being nearly blind was incredibly frustrating, and it was kind of one of those experiences. We're going to meet a story today about John telling a story about someone who was fully blind. And blind so from birth. Now, John in John chapter 9, when John is writing his gospel, he's an old man. He's kind of probably recording his stories to someone to be written down because he's had this experience of God in the person of Jesus Christ. And it was so transformational for him that he wants everybody to hear this story and to know that Jesus was not just a rabbi, he was not just a good teacher, he was not just a nice person doing nice things, that he, in fact, was the Son of God, sent for our salvation and rescue and to bring together God and his people once again, once and for all. And if you are a person that's seeking out faith or asking questions about faith, at some point you're going to have to wrestle with this very question too. Do I believe Jesus to be the Son of God? Not just a good teacher, not just someone who told nice stories, but do I really believe that he was the one sent from God for our salvation? And so if you're wrestling with that, and as we're working through these stories in John's gospel, find good company, because these people were wrestling with the same issues, asking themselves the same questions. So let's read together John chapter 9. We're only going to read a few verses. I'll stop and talk about them, point out some things, and then we'll get through. But John chapter 9, starting at verse 1. As he, being Jesus, went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Let's just stop there, because that's a great question. That's a powerful question. And some of our sufferings are the obvious result of things that we've done. If your boss angers you and you tell them off and you throw a stapler at them and you're fired and find yourself unemployable, you probably aren't praying, God, why am I unemployable? It's obvious why you're not able to get a job. But there's some sufferings in life that are not obvious. We don't know why we go through them. There's no explanation. We cannot link our suffering to any specific behavior. And so we ask these questions. Was it something that I did? Was it something that somebody else did? The Jews in Jesus' time in this account believed that if a child was born with a problem, then either the child sinned while in their mother's womb, or that the parents had done something. Maybe mom went into a pagan temple when she was pregnant. Maybe dad had been dishonest in his dealings at work. And so God was now kind of punishing this young child for either his sin while in the womb or for the parent's sin elsewhere in life. And so it was normal for someone who was born blind. People asked, whose fault is it that this child was born the way that they were? Now, when Jill and I had little kids, if one of our kids got the stomach flu, we became instant FBI agents, trying to decide who caused this to happen. Who caused this level of suffering? Because in a family of 6, once one child gets the flu, it just kind of goes through the whole house, and you live kind of for 2 weeks with a barf bucket. I mean, that's kind of what you've been signed up for because somebody else did something, right? And so we would start asking our questions. All right, who did they play with? Were they exhibiting any signs of fever or illness while they were playing with them? And what neglectful parent would bring a sick kid to the library if they knew they weren't feeling well? Or maybe it was the kid's parents that were sick, or maybe somebody in the kid's parents' workplace. And we entered into this deep dive of trying to figure out this very question. Who's to blame for our suffering, right? Now, this idea that someone is to blame for our suffering, maybe that sounds archaic to you. Maybe this idea that if you could do something while you were in your mother's womb that would cause the suffering seems archaic to us. But the truth is, if you're like me, you've asked this very question yourself. Who's to blame for this situation that I can't see a rationale for? Who's to blame for this thing that I'm going through? Was it something I did as a teenager that's now coming back to haunt me? Was it something I did while I was in college and God has been kind of storing up all these sins of mine in a basket and just waiting to kind of inflict me with some kind of pain because of something I did 20 years ago? And if so, is that really what God is like? Nothing will turn us into theologians like suffering. Nothing will take us deep into the scriptures trying to figure out how does God work, what are his ways like, and how is it that I found myself in this situation? Who sinned, this boy, this man, or his parents? And Jesus answers them in verses 3. I'll read through to the end of verse 5. Neither this man nor his parents have sinned, Jesus said. But this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. When the disciples ask this really, really important question, Jesus answers them, neither. It wasn't the kid in womb. It wasn't mom going to the temple, and it wasn't dad being dishonest in his business. This happened so that God might display his glory in someone's life. He's saying your cancer is not because you slept around in college, or your son's inability to get a job isn't because when you were 10 you ripped somebody off on your paper route. And thank goodness that's not how God is. If God inflicted us with an ailment or a circumstance for every sin that we'd ever committed, this would be a gathering of a leper colony, wouldn't it not? Or the front row at a faith healing crusade. We would be a wreck. We would be a total disaster. But sin is the problem in this story because we live in a fallen world where sin and selfish choices and the consequences of 7 billion people living outside of God's intention amount to a tsunami of circumstances and situations that impact every single one of us, no matter where we are and no matter how righteous we live. And this story illustrates for us this ache within the disciples' hearts that they know it's not right that a child be born blind. It's not right. That was not God's intention. Deep inside these disciples, they know this is not the way the world is supposed to be. God did not plan our lives to be so devastated by sin. Children aren't supposed to be born blind. Adults aren't to die in their 30s because of cancer. None of this was God's intent. But we live in a world awash with the consequences of sin. It touched this family's life, and no doubt it's touched yours as well. And so then Jesus says that this has happened so that God's power might be displayed on this man's life. I want you to hear me today. Jesus is not saying, I inflicted this child with blindness, so 20-some years later, I could swing by and heal him and put on a show for you. That's not what he's saying. That's not how God works. What he is saying is, though we live in a broken world that's awash with suffering, there's hope. Because God comes to us in the person of Jesus Christ to display his power on the platform of our pain. That no matter our hurts or our wounds or our challenges, the ones that we've inflicted upon ourselves or the ones that others have, or the ones that we cannot simply explain through any kind of credible investigation, no matter how broken life is, it is not beyond the reach of God and his mercy. God is the one who comes to us in our brokenness, wanting to redeem, wanting to make things whole again. And Jesus says here, and God's power is like a light that shines brightest in the darkness, in those situations where things are really bad. That when things are difficult, when God steps in, it's like a light gets turned on and we can see things. Now, I've been collecting some stories in this past week, examples of how I've seen this happen, or as people have told me them. Some of you are here today, so I'm going to generalize them a little bit so no one kind of knows who they're about. But let me just share three with you quickly. I was aware of a situation that was horrifically tragic. Horrifically tragic. And as I got to be a little bit familiar with the situation, I discovered that there was this beautiful person of faith that was right in the midst of it, not causing it, but just happened to be there. And their witness to the people in this situation was beautiful. It was like God shone a light into that most difficult of circumstances through the kind and gentle love and care and sacrificial love of this individual. I was talking with someone who was telling me about a season where they were deconstructing their faith. They were in a deep season of doubt. Things were really, really complicated. They were feeling so lost, and a knock at the door came. And it was a friend of theirs, a person of faith, who came on in, and they put on the coffee pot. They heard their story. They didn't judge them or freak out when they told them they weren't sure what they believed anymore, and began to pray with them and walked with them for a series of weeks, until this person kind of got back to their faith again. God shining his light in the midst of people's darkness. I was aware of a story this week of someone who intended a random act of generosity. And it was a bullseye strike to someone's specific need. But it wasn't just the generosity that was appreciated. It became a symbolic reminder that God sees me. And he's met this need, and I can count on him in the days to come as well. Again and again, maybe you've had your own experiences of this. These moments where life gets messy, where we're in a season of suffering, and God shows up and he shines his light to remind us that I am in the business of redeeming my people and redeeming their suffering. And maybe you've been a forensic sin expert. You're sitting in your circumstance or your difficult situation, and you've been asking yourself, what did I do? What did somebody else do to me? What's that string connected to? Is it connected to this situation that I'm in now? Is that how God works? Is that what's going on in this situation? And Jesus says to these folks and to us, you're asking the wrong question. And he invites us to trust him with those most difficult things. And say, God, would this be a place where you display your glory? Let's keep reading in this story. I'll pick up at verse 5 again. Jesus says, while I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with saliva, and put it in the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam, which word means sent. So the man went and washed, and he came home seeing. Can you imagine how great that would be when you've been blind your entire life and you came home seeing? Again, I had my own minor story of that. When I finally got my eyes fixed, again, I said that a cataract surgery is a 15-minute procedure. 19 months later, I finally got my eyes done, and I was sitting in Costco, just kind of getting in my glasses so I could finally see for the very first time. And I'll never forget putting those glasses on and look. I mean, there's nothing more beautiful than Costco, right? It's like the Garden of Eden. That's what it felt like to me when I could see again. I could see the beauty of the gray of the concrete floors, that beautiful bright red shelving, those big white posters with Times New Roman black font. Like, it was so wonderful to me to see everything. I teared up. I was like, I can see. I could not get over how wonderful it was to be able to see again. I can't imagine for this guy to be able, never having seen his parents' face, his neighbors, the creation around him, his own hands and his own face, to be able to see for the very first time. But Jesus didn't come just to give him his physical sight back. Jesus comes to this man because he wants this man and everybody in this story to see who God is with that same kind of crystal clarity. You see, the disciples had this question, who sinned? But really, behind that question is another question, which is this: what is God really like? Is God really like somebody that would be gathering up my sins and having them in a basket and just kind of waiting for the perfect time to stick me with something, to kind of teach me a lesson about something I did 20 years ago? Is that what he's like? Is God keeping score? Has he got this kind of tally sheet like a giant cosmic accountant watching over things, kind of keeping track of my goods and my bads? Is he kind of then just waiting to kind of send out some disaster my way to kind of pay me back for the things that I've done? Can you imagine growing up and someone telling you, oh, you're blind? Yeah. Whew, what did you do in utero? What sin did you commit in your mother's womb? Can you imagine for the parent to be growing up watching their son struggle, never to be able to find work, always out begging and thinking, that's because I went here, or I ate that, or my husband cheated somebody on a business deal, and now my son pays that for the rest of their life. Is that what God is really like? See, Jesus did not just come to give this man his physical sight back. He came to give this man and all of the people in this story, and you and me, clarity about what God is really like. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. I've come to turn on the light so that you can see with absolute clarity what I am like. I have come to show you exactly what God is like, the incarnation of God, the Word become flesh, coming and moving right into your life and your world so that you can just watch me and listen to me and see how I treat people. And from all of this, you can know what God is truly, truly like. Sometimes, I get up early on Sunday mornings, and I'll usually try to set my clothes out before I get, because Jill's still sleeping because it's like 5:30, and so, but every now and again I forget like my belt or something, and I have to go back into our room, so I'm thinking, I really don't want to wake her up at 5:30, so I go in and I'm trying to be quiet, which is not my specialty. And I will go in and I'll kind of try to open the closet door, and I'm kind of reaching for the belt, and I'm knocking things off the shelf, and I'm knocking clothes off the hangers, and making a great big mess, and finally I'm getting frustrated, so I finally just turn on the light. And as soon as the light is on, I can see exactly what I'm looking for. It's there perfectly right before my eyes. Jesus comes and says, I've come to turn on the lights so you can see God and what he is truly like right in front of you. Blindness, physical blindness, and blindness to what God is really like is the central theme in this passage. And for these people and for you and I, we grow up understanding some things and getting them right, and we get it and we know it and we're right about it. But it's also true that you and I have some views about God and how he works that maybe are kind of true but warped or bent. And I'm guessing if you're like me, There's things that you're just wrong about, and I'm wrong about. And so we are disciples, growing and maturing in our faith so that God can continue to reveal to us what He is really like. Now, we don't have time to go through it this morning, but if we were to read through to the end of verse 27, what you would see is this poor man who finally can see goes home, and his neighbors give him a hard time. And so they say, well, if you've really been healed, which we don't think you really have been, you should go to the priests, and they take him to the religious leaders, and they get into a big fight. And they're asking all kinds of questions because what Jesus is doing does not fit into their understanding of what God is like. They bring his parents into it, and they pester them and torture them with questions and kind of humiliate them, and they're afraid of what's going to happen to them. And the end result is the religious leaders take this man and they kick him out of the temple. They excommunicate him from the religious community, which is exactly where he'd begun at the beginning of the story. All of this because nobody really truly knows what God is like, and Jesus is doing things beyond the box that they think he should fit in. And Jesus wants us to see what God is really like. So let me just kind of draw three quick things, and then we'll wrap it up here. I think God wants us to see that he redeems brokenness. God can redeem our brokenness. So many of you have circumstances in your life that just break other people's hearts. They break your heart. They break our hearts. There's no rhyme, no reason to them. We can't say, oh yes, there's a line from your behavior here to your circumstance here. It just makes no sense. But we live in this fallen world, and in this moment, when Jesus comes to this blind man, he does not sit him down and put on a PowerPoint presentation and say, okay, we'll see what you did here, and then there was this, and then your neighbor did that, and your uncle did this, and that's exactly why this happened. No. He comes with redemption in his hands. It's not always clear how, but God comes to redeem. And if you're here today and you've been carrying trauma, or you're weighted down by hurts or sins, and you've been doing spiritual sin forensics, trying to figure out why is all of this happening, Jesus invites you to take your woundedness and place it into his hands and to let it become sacred ground. You know, the way Jesus heals this man is, shall we say, unconventional. Fair to say? But it's actually an arrow pointing back to the creation story in Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2 has this lovely image that when God is creating humanity, he picks up some dust and he breathes on it, and it comes to life. When Jesus heals this man, he makes some mud and he puts it on this man's eyes, and this man kind of gets resurrected. He has an experience of transformation, not just physically, but in the end, spiritually as well. And what if we were to take those things in us that are dead or dying or we're struggling with and allow Jesus to breathe his life onto them that they might be redeemed? This does not mean that we'll get exactly what we want. It does not mean that the rest of our life will be pain-free. That's not how Jesus works. But we will know he's in it with us. And we have these opportunity to experience his light shining into our darkness again and again. And on this side of eternity, that is great hope. The second thing I think Jesus wants us to see as his people is that healing is an expression of grace. It's an expression of grace. If we were to have an extra hour, we would go through this chapter and see that the people who knew the most about God were completely blind. And this man who knows absolutely nothing about who healed him, he knows no information, is the recipient of grace. If your initial thought in your own circumstance is, God would never display his mercy in my life, God would never shine his light into my life, then you have a wrong view of God. You have a view that's been distorted through whatever reasons. We can become so obsessed with what I call spiritual math. I've done this many bad things and this many good things. And once my good things start to kind of outweigh my bad things, then God will work in my life. Then he will move towards me. That's not the story of the scriptures. Our worthiness factors not. God moves towards his people and shows grace and mercy. If you believe that every bad thing in your life is connected to your bad deeds, then it only makes sense that we would somehow think good things in our life will only be because we've done good things. But that's not grace. Jesus moves to this man for nothing that he's done, who has no knowledge of who's healing him, and he heals him out of the love that is in his heart. And so that this man can become a billboard for what the life of the kingdom looks like expressed in his life. The third thing I think Jesus wants us to see is that he has come to deal with the sin and the brokenness in our world. This passage starts with this question: who sinned that caused this? If we were to get our crime board back out again and start doing our forensic test to figure out why is all of this happening, who sinned? This Friday is Good Friday. We'll remember the day that Jesus was wrongfully convicted of a crime he did not commit. He was set before a bogus court in the middle of the night, was not offered due process. A mob decides his fate. He's stripped and beaten and hauled through the streets of Jerusalem to be humiliated and ultimately nailed to a Roman cross where he's publicly murdered. Who sinned that should all take place? And the reality is, it was us. It was me. It was you. All of those things that we talked about earlier, where we live outside of God's will and his ways. Jesus says, I've come to deal with those once and for all. You've heard us say before, Jesus lived the life we were meant to live, and he died the death we were meant to die. Who sinned? We did. And so Jesus comes to turn on the lights, so that we can all see what he is really like. He's the God who comes to redeem what's been broken. He's the God who is not keeping score, and he comes and he offers each one of us his grace. And he's the God who takes upon himself the sins of the world that they might be paid for once and for all. Can you see that? Is that the God that you're worshiping? After 19 months of living with cataracts, one of the things I realized is that blurriness became normal. The world had no color in it. That was normal after 19 months. Everything was dull and blurry and fuzzy, and that just became normal to me. Maybe your view of God as being ungracious and punishing you for all of these things is normal for you now. Maybe this idea that you have to earn yourself or get your act together or do better is kind of normal for you now. Maybe the idea that Jesus wouldn't help you is normal for you now. My prayer for you today is that Jesus would turn on the lights and that you would see the beauty and his glory and the offer that he extends to each and every one of us. This is what your God is like. Because if that's what he's like, wouldn't you entrust your life to him? Let me pray for us today. Lord Jesus, we thank you that you were not content to leave us where we were, but that it was your desire to make sure we knew what you were truly like. God, we pray for all the things that we hold on to that maybe are not really true. Views about how you are, about how you deal with our sin, about what's really going on behind our suffering. May we hear your words, and may they be the loudest words in our heart today. And God, if this is what you're like, then we want to give our lives to you. We want to surrender fully to you, because we want to experience more and more of the life that you've come to offer us. And we pray this in your name.